everyone. Welcome to my studio in Mayport, Florida. We went live at 4 today, and oh my, I had some real technical issues that were difficult to resolve. So I promised you that I would be back, and here I am to bring it all together for you. So let's get started. The last couple of weeks, we've been talking about printmaking and clay. So we talked about making inks so we could block print and silkscreen. We talked about craft foam. We talked about printing with craft foam. We talked about easy screen and how to print on clay and how to print on paper. Why would we print on paper and not just print on clay? It's a timing issue, and it will help you in the classroom. If you print on clay, that means the clay has to be at the right state. And you can print, say with the silk screen or the stamps, really at any point. You can print it, I wouldn't print bone dry because it's fragile, but you could do wet, leather hard, and already bisqued. You could still print on those directly. But an indirect print of printing on paper and then printing it on the clay gives you a little bit more flexibility, which you're going to see when I show you a couple of ways that you can do this. So what we're going to be talking about again is transfer prints from newsprint to clay. When you do it and how do you do it? So let me show you how. We're going to use, first thing we're going to use is water on moist clay. So you take your clay slab, this is moist, it's just been rolled out. The benefit of using paper is you can collage it together. So I'm going to mist that slab just to get it so it can kind of accept it and stick on there really well. And then I'm going to moisten it from the back. You really have to moisten this paper so that you can see the image come through for the underglazes to transfer, because they don't crust off the paper, and that's a good thing. But they do need to be encouraged to release from the paper and go to the clay. So take a sponge, wet it down, and then when you peel it off, wow, those images are great. Now, I do have to tell you this. What you see on the right, which is the block printing with the craft foam, really won't give you a strong color as a silkscreen on the left. This is another thing that I do is if I want to enhance an image, I might silkscreen right on the clay. So it gives me so many surface opportunities. Let's talk about using casting slip to transfer our paper, underglaze papers to clay. Casting slip is such a versatile slip in the classroom. It comes by the gallon, comes in low fire and high fire. Low fire is fine obviously if you're using low fire clay. It looks gray, but it fires white, white, white. And man, it goes a long way. But what is the real advantage? The real advantage is it doesn't contain as much water as slip, and it will dry quickly on your pieces. So that if you're doing this with students in the classroom, it will really speed things along. I use this Strathmore 300 series newsprint, and I really love it. But really, you could use whatever newsprint. And of course, you can just paint directly on the newsprint with your underglaze colors. I do this. I did a lesson plan called Matisse Underglaze Applique that we're going to post for you that uses this technique. Another thing that I love to do, because I can't always make up my mind, is to swirl some colors together. So I'm going to drop some colors on there. And while they're wet, I'm going to mix them right on the paper, and you will see how beautiful these results are. It's a good time to talk about mixing colors. It's a good time to talk about analogous colors, value, things like that. And no matter how you do it, it is going to look great. So now here are our strips. They've dried up because when you work on paper with underglaze, it's got to dry. And I am putting the casting slip. Notice I'm holding it down with a pen tool, and that way I can put a nice, even, generous coat on there. And I want to get it well coated It doesn't have to be gobbed on, but a good generous coat. Now, before I do that, we're going to also put it on these small little squares. This is the Flame Orange by AMACO, and I just love this bright orange. And I'm going to coat these. Now, you might put your first shapes down and then do this, but for the sake of demonstration, I'm just going to do them all now because I can adjust the time while I'm doing the video. When you come back now, look at that. It looks like leather. So hence the term leather hard. If there's any heavy spots that won't dry out, brush them out. Take them, put them face down on your clay, and roll them onto the surface so they make a lot of contact. And when you pull them off, wow, I just love that marbleizing. Now, when you go to pull them off, sometimes you'll notice they're a little finicky, and you can use a scraper to push them down, but really I use a damp sponge or a paintbrush with some water because it's all about getting them more moist to get them to transfer. But if they don't transfer just right, you can hide it by adding other pieces on top of it. Now I'm going to take my orange pieces and I'm going to lay them anywhere I can overlap. The first pieces, the blue ones that I put down, you don't really want to overlap in the very first part of this. But as you put your next color, game on, you can overlap. They work pretty good. So we're going to put all of them down. And then we're going to protect the surface. We're going to put some plastic wrap on there. And then we can roll it once we have that plastic wrap on. That'll protect the surface. It'll keep any colors from moving around. They're usually pretty stable though, but I find that that plastic wrap really works great. So I'm going to pull that off, and now to make sure that they're going to transfer, I'm going to add a little water. You can use a sponge, or I use a paintbrush that works pretty good. But if you have to smear it down with a scraper and you don't want to mess up your design, take a little piece of plastic wrap, put it over it, and really push them down. It's all about the moisture that's going to help those transfer. So make sure that if they're not transferring, you know, you can use a rib to scrub them down, but really what's really important is a little bit of water. Not enough to wet the surface. I mean, a little bit. You're going to notice I have a fit with this one. It really just for some reason doesn't want to transfer. And sometimes you'll run across that. So I didn't want to edit it out because that will happen. It worked okay, but I'm still not super crazy about it. How do you fix that? You cover it up with another shape. So on this, I'm going to take a paintbrush, add a little bit of water. So I added another square on top, added some water and a scraper. You can still see it's being a little finicky. I'm going to work with it a little bit and just kind of pull it up, and where it doesn't want to transfer, I scrub it with the scraper, and I'm done. And I use those patches, what I call patches, all the time to cover any areas that didn't work. Again, this works best when your slab is moist. Now, what I can do is, if students are done with this part, cover it on the top and bottom with plastic till the next class. But also make sure you do that where I took the brayer and rolled it, because remember, underglaze is clay, and if you leave any of the little edges where they're slightly up, you'll feel it with your fingers. So you want to make sure everything is flush to the surface. Let's talk about transfers on bisque. They can be a little tricky. So what we're going to use is this Underglaze applicator, and we're going to draw on the newsprint. If you don't have an Underglaze applicator, use a paintbrush. It will work just fine. Once we do that, it's got to totally dry. So you could do this with a paintbrush. Now, once those black lines are dry, you could also add some, some color washes of Underglaze over it if you want to. But I find this works best with just kind of one color, and you'll see why in a minute. So we're going to cut this out, and we're going to put it on a bisque slab. You don't have to buy them, make your own. Take it, I'm going to put the whole thing in water. I'm not just going to sponge the back, because man, this bisque wants to really take the moisture out of that paper. I'm going to put it on, damp sponge it. I'm even going to take a scraper in a minute to really get it to come off, but you'll notice I'm doing it a couple of times, and I pull it up to check it. But I'm going to sponge it until I get it to transfer, and then I'm going to take that rib and really scrub it onto the surface. And wow, that really prints well. It's a little finicky. Try it yourself first before you do it with students, but you'll get some great results. The other thing that I like to do, and this is really why I love underglazes, is they can be thick for printing, or you can add some water and make them like a wash. You can blend them together, and you can now paint on top of those dried lines, and you don't have to stay in the lines. Just add a little bit of color right over the top, and it will really enhance your image. And the colors look like what they're going to look like before and after they're fired, so you can really mix them like paints. Again, I'm using a wet paintbrush and almost making it like a wash, because I don't want to paint and paint. I want just one stroke, kind of like watercolor, and be done. And wow, adding that color really makes it. So let's switch cameras here. Okay, so let me move some of this out of the way and let's recap. You can print on straight on clay, or you can do a water transfer on moist clay. So I did the clay slab, I cut these sheets, I put them down water. This works best on moist clay. All right. Another thing that you can do that we did is you can do it with casting slip. And this is now ready to be fired, and you can layer it up as much as you want to. Remember, if these are stubborn when you're trying to scrubbing them in place and they keep lifting up, you might want to go in there and just moisten the back just a little bit. Last but not least, we have these, and this is the one that I did. Notice I didn't try to paint it all in exactly. I think it looks beautiful like watercolor. And this is one that I did that I printed with you before, and we overlapped some images. It's a little stubborn to transfer. When you go to water transfer this on bisque, these layers and layers and layers of underglaze I did don't like to transfer too much. You have to really wet them and really work with it. It can be stubborn. It does give you a stressed look that I kind of enjoy, but you know, you have to figure out what you want. So this is a great one you may want to try. I would try that yourself before you get started. Okay. Next week, what we're going to do is we are going to do some alternative silkscreen techniques with things you might already have in your studio. If you don't want to stretch a screen, you don't want to use easy screen, you don't want to do this whole developing screen thing, oh, I've got some hints for you. They will be made out of common materials you can find at Joann's or the dollar store, or you might even have in your own classroom. So we're going to use some Underglaze ink, and we're going to do some alternative silk screens, and I'll see you then.